Welcome to the very first episode of a new podcast series for Eton Bridge Partners, exploring the secrets behind successfully navigating significant change. I'm Sarah Scannella, partner within the Human Resources Search Practice here at Eton Bridge Partners, and I also work as an executive coach. As an executive search, interim management and consulting firm, we very much put people at the heart of business, taking great care to build trusted long-term relationships with clients, candidates and our employees alike. Our passion for people means we are very fortunate to be able to work alongside some of the most inspiring business leaders who bring unique perspectives on the world of work. This presents us with a great opportunity to share their insights and learnings to contribute to making the world of work even more human. In this podcast series, I'll be chatting to a number of senior leaders from many walks of life who will be sharing the real secrets to successfully navigating big change. We will be exploring this topic from different perspectives, taking into account the best thinking from business, psychology, coaching and leadership. With change and transformation now being the norm in our operating environments, it's critical for organisations to rethink their change capabilities and, more importantly, how they best lead the human and emotional side of change. I'm delighted to be joined today by our first guest of the series, Mark Bond. Mark is chairman at BoostWorks, an employee reward and recognition provider, and group chair, mentor and coach at Vistage. Mark, welcome. It's lovely to have you here today to talk about this subject, about successfully leading change. We've had the privilege of working together for a while before during a few sort of crazy moments of change and transformation. But would love to hear a little bit more about what you've been doing more recently and your work with Vistage.
Yeah, sure. So I do, I'm plural, I think is the phrase they officially use at this point in my life. So I do three things. I'm chairman of a software company called BoostWorks that do employee engagement. I do transformations for businesses that want to sell themselves. So I work with a corporate broker about people approach them and say, we want to sell our organisation. They're like, well, you've got to get you ready for a year or so and do a few things. And then I work with chief execs in a coaching capacity with an organisation called Vistage, which mainly operates in the SME sector, and they're the largest coaching organisation in the world for SME chief execs. And pretty much all the people I'm working with are going through transformations. They want to change their business commercially or things like that. And as you're aware, that was a lot of my background. So for the last 20 years or so, I tended to work in businesses on transformations, either commercial ones or sometimes be putting in process change around a new system to, the classic one historically used to be about a digital transformation, but they were different types of those things.
Yeah. And just tell us briefly about some of those companies that you've worked for, because you spent a good chunk of your time at Vodafone.
I did. I was a director of Vodafone in the UK for more years than I can remember, certainly 10, 12, something like that. And I was there for 18 years. And in those roles, I was strategy director we called it strategy and business change director, which is why I led a bunch of transformation programs. I ran their consumer business, their enterprise business, and a bunch of other things like that. But yes, so I've done large corporate, and now I tend to do SME. So I've seen it at both ends of the spectrum in terms of scale and size of companies.
And I think one of the things that I absolutely loved about working with you is just your kind of real energy and passion around people.
Yeah.
And about kind of leading teams and really driving through change through those teams. So, I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have today. The objective, I guess, for this podcast series throughout 2024 is really trying to get underneath some of those secrets of behind successfully leading change. I'm sure, you've had lots of experience of going through big transformations. I'm sure many people will have kind of read the stats as well around, McKinsey's report of about 70% of change programs fail. And there was a further piece of research done last year by EY and said Business School, which pretty much, concurred with that, which actually we're still having a large number of failures in terms of transformation programs. And I think, again, from kind of the research and again from experience, it doesn't matter whether that transformation is a digital change or a technology change, whether it's through sort of acquisition and mergers or whether it's a kind of strategy or cultural change, there's still a really high failure rate. And I'm quite keen to kind of understand and unpick that. And what's certainly coming through from that research is that there's not enough time and attention paid to the human transition. behind change and what it takes for people to either do something differently or change their behaviours or just to adapt to what it is that they're doing. So really keen to kind of sort of dig into that a little bit more. So perhaps to start, could you, you've done many things over the years. Could you give us some context of just some of those big sort of change programs that you've been
Sure.
involved with? You don't need to necessarily say
No, I do all of them.
but,
So because I've been doing it for probably over 20 years now, but I'll do you the first, and I'll tell you the largest as well. And then it'll
yeah,
give you
great.
a flavour for them. So I think the first was an interesting one, and I think I'm doing broadly better than 70%. But I have had my share of failures, which is important, I think, in this life to learn from. So the first one was I was marketing director at Vodafone. They asked me to take over a sales function, and they put in a version of Salesforce that hadn't worked. The organisation was, or the sales team were only delivering 60% of target. Big ramifications for the organisation. So I went in there and did that transformation, which is a story in itself. Because at the time I was like, I genuinely thought the chief exec was nuts when he sat me down and said, "We'd like you to run this transformation, Mark." So that was the first, and unfortunately that one went well. And I learned, I would say, my operating model, which I'll come back to, which is all about how do you take the people through it. Probably the largest I ever did was about, and that first one was over 20 years ago. The largest I ever did was major CRM transformation. It was a sort of £250 million project. We did it with Accenture. He said at the time it was the largest one actually they thought in the world, and that was we were effectively had customer service systems in Vodafone, retail stores, and an online platform, and they didn't speak to one another. So we needed to put them all into one system and effectively get a single view of the customer to effectively enable this new digital world where people expect to interact online and buy something online, walk into a store and say it's the wrong colour that's turned up or whatever it was. So that was probably the biggest. But the first one went really well, which I sort of got into it. But there were a few went wrong along the way, which I'm happy to talk about.
Yeah, no, well, absolutely. You kind of led yourself into that one, actually. So, I mean, these were big transformation projects, right? There's a lot of people involved. You're needing to engage and change the mindsets and the behaviours and the way people work, I guess, across that kind of employee base. So, when you think back to where it did go well at a high level, and we'll dig into this in more detail as we go through, but at a high level, what was it that kind of went well? What were the things that made it successful?
So I think a number of things, but probably the biggest one for me is that you have open communication up and down the organisation. So or two-way communication. So that first one that went well, it had gone wrong before, and I went in, as I say, at the time I was like, most of the sales team would say the reason things weren't going well is because this terrible marketing department that I've been running. So I genuinely was like, this is nuts. Why would you put me in? They hate me, to try and fix it. But actually, the first thing I did was I need to go around and win these people's confidence and speak to them. So I had 1,400 salespeople, and I went round in groups of 30, no senior management in there, just the account managers. And I was like, what's going wrong? What have we done wrong? And actually, very early on, it became clear there were 4 or 5 key things, and it was the classic. The senior leaders had a motivation and incentive for doing this change program, but that didn't make any difference to the people on the ground doing the job day to day, and therefore, when you found out what their frustrations were, it was just more admin, and then we worked out what would actually make a benefit to them. But no one had really had that conversation. Stuff filters up an organisation. Miraculously, I've learned over the years it always gets better news as it goes up the organisation. Can be quite different to what's actually happening on the ground. So that true, transparent, open communication up and down the organisation, where people speak truth to power, that's probably the biggest element for me that makes a difference. But also the bit of actually, what's the benefit? Communicating that to people and communicating that well. People go on that change journey at different times. And creating that environment where that is discussed and those sorts of things. So good communication, two-way. There's a load of others, but for me, if you don't get that right, it will all go horribly wrong because you don't know really what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. So you went round and spoke to kind of groups of employees doing the roles on the ground. No kind of leadership, no other leadership or managers in there. So I mean, was that the first time they did experience that, working with a senior leader and someone actually asking them what they thought?
So interesting. One of the first things that came back was we hadn't seen anybody from head office for a long time, so they were a bit like surprised to see you here. But the main thing for them was, by the time I'd run about 10 groups, there were 3 or 4 key things came out. for them the issue was they just wanted to know what they were going to earn as commission. And actually, what really the HQ team were asking them was load all this data onto the system so we can forecast better, have a better understanding of our pipeline, all this sort of stuff. Wonderful things for a business to know. Didn't make any difference to them. They actually want to know what their target was and what their pay packet would be the next month. So when we started to explain, well, actually, if we load this thing onto the system and you do that, we'll do another calculation for it that tells you what you're going to earn, what the commission on the deal would be, all the rest of it. All of a sudden, they were interested. So it's a small example, but it was those types of things of incentivize the people, up and down the organisation, because sometimes those bigger, wonderful corporate objectives that you as senior leaders think are wonderful aren't particularly motivating or aspiring for people. So it's that balance of everybody's got a benefit and tailoring your message to your different audiences about what those benefits will be, and externalities and problems will come along the way, but when they do, you talk about it and then you do the right. These are my stakeholders. It isn't just senior leaders who want an output. It is actually stakeholders, the people, sometimes it can be stakeholders who in some of the programs aren't going to end up with a job at the end of it. But what I've learned is to have those conversations as transparently and openly as possible. And you'll be surprised sometimes at the level of professionalism you'll get from people who know they're probably working to make themselves redeployed or redundant or out of a job. But have those conversations openly, early, and deal with them in a transparent fashion is vitally important.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that you're well, this isn't the challenge, but you're a great leader, but actually I think so many organisations almost leave it to chance that their leaders are doing that bit, that kind of connecting in with their teams and making sure that they're translating the change. But actually, in some places, in some teams, that isn't happening, and that's where you actually get that kind of real disconnect in terms of the overall objectives and actually what you want to achieve versus what people are feeling on the ground. And as the evidence and the research is suggesting, it's not paying enough attention to that human journey. What do people individually need to connect into in order to make this change and to make it, to help them make sense of it and for it to be worth their while doing something different, right? We're creatures of habit. People kind of want to buy in, want to, to stick with what they know. So to buy into a change, there needs to be a real sort of knowledge, I guess, and understanding from a leader about their team and how it impacts them and therefore how they kind of work through it together.
Yeah, so, and I think there's a couple of things in there. The other thing I've seen is lots of organisations have the transformation team or the project team.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they're not, they're not regarded as, shall we say, some of the high potential employees. It's just always there's the project team. Actually, it's really important to have the evangelists who are the respective people in the business who do the job, who are part of the project team, that gives it credibility and authority. But often convincing those people that they should step out of their sales manager role to actually, I want you to go and be part of the project team is quite hard because they're like, well, yeah, but and so there's a lot about you need to make people realise that doing transformation is really important and leading change is really important and will be respected and in the organisation. So I talked about one of the programs that the big Vodafone one was a project called NewCo. We knew it was going to be make or break for the company, huge CRM project, but we couldn't actually get the good people because we knew that we wanted to redesign all the customer processes. We knew we needed the best brains in the company, all the people who are currently doing that. But when you said, do you want to go and work on this project? They were like, well, no, because actually, clearly the organisation is going to be shorter at the end of it. Why do I end up on a temporary seat when I'm on a permanent seat and I'm really valued? So we actually had to get, a whole load of things done with the HR team around explaining that the view was you had to have done a transformation project to be able to be a senior leader, and you had to be good at it to be a senior leader.
Right.
So things like that, and you also, to your point, you have to have people who work together well, know each other well, because it's difficult. And the individual ceremony names. There was someone I so wanted in the program because they were brilliant at understanding the customer experience, and I had to do a lot of convincing to get this individual into the program. This individual I'd worked with closely would produce works of genius for me, but was a highly volatile individual. And I knew every 6 months she would come to you and go, it's all gone wrong, the world's ended, da, da, da. And you had to listen patiently, support her, and get her pointed and reorientated in the right direction. No, she was doing a great job. And actually it was also frequently a crisis of confidence on her own part. But that was just because I knew her as a leader, and I knew what would motivate her to get in the project. So when you're driving people through change, you've got to know how they respond and react in certain situations, and how, when you're pushing them too hard, when you're not, those sorts of things. So I think there are other elements of that. Organisations have to value and appreciate that change is a really important skill, and acknowledge it as an important skill for a leader, because it's sort of frequently I've seen organisations that, well, that's the project team, and they're not the best people.
Yeah.
No disrespect intended to anyone who does that, but there's also this, and how do you? Everyone's different. Everyone responds differently. Everyone on different change curves. How do good leaders know their teams, know the people, how they're going to react in certain situations. So some of those things are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on earlier when you were speaking, Mark, about and we've all been there when those change programs are just not going well.
Yeah, about a few.
So tell me a little bit more about those, and just perhaps some of the insights as to what was it that contributed to things kind of going off track, and how you got them back on course.
So I think loads of different reasons why programs goes off track. Sometimes I think that one of the biggest programs had a strange situation where it was a complex project at the start. With big projects, you'll have external parties, integrators, and the people who actually own the software, the system provider. We had a situation, no one would warranty the product. So we couldn't get anyone to take prime accountability.
Right.
And the program got into difficulties. And because we weren't actually one team, up until that stage, I'd been like, because I had employees from my organisations, third-party integrator, the actual people who ran built the software, and I always talked to them as one team. I was like, I don't care what colour your badge is when you come in, because guests would have a different colour badge to our company badge. You're one team in here. But when the project went bad, because no one was sure of the contractual relationship in that room, and no one wanted to get landed with the bill for the thing that didn't work, everyone starts to get into right, I've got a corner to defend, all that sort of stuff. So I've had programs go bad and that decision was made 3 years before the program even started, about some purchasing team deciding who was going to sign what on the contract and couldn't get the rate they wanted, and no one was willing to sign up for it. So there can be commercial reasons like that, but most of it generally at the end is people not working effectively together, and and there might be a commercial reason for that. There might be a difference of opinion, and that'll be down to leadership who haven't surfaced those issues properly and dealt with them and sorted them out. But and you're not always looking for. It's another important point. You're not always looking for consensus on these programs. Actually, I used to do a lot of work in the teams I was running, what were the personality profiles of people in the team, and what I was trying to do was create an environment to go, look, I'm the one blue in the corner, and therefore it's perfectly okay for me, whatever profiling tool you use, but therefore I'll have this view, and actually that view is respected, because we need the view of the blues, because actually we haven't got many blues in the room.
Yeah.
So you just create an environment where everything comes out, everything is discussed, and it's okay to be different, and it's okay to have a different view.
Yeah.
You don't, isn't, well, you've all got to agree to this. So I think some of those things is very hard. Lots of reasons programs have gone wrong over the years, but fundamentally it will be you haven't got one team and you haven't got enough open and honest dialogue about things, and sometimes that will be that you're trying to create. The original program will have defined what good looks like and why you're doing it, but somehow whatever you're dealing with, you can't tie back to that to make the right decisions. So it's more about the people stuff, communication, how teams run, than on my one, I could have blamed, well, it was the contract 3 years ago, but actually it was about the dynamics in the room on the day that were creating that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's bringing it back into that theme, which is actually it's about the people involved in the change, and actually how they connect into it. How they spot things. I think quite often, with programs I've been involved in, you have these we had very high aspirations as to what was going to get delivered as part of that change, but often that was done at a very senior level, with their lens on the organisation. And actually, it's only when you start getting into the flow of a program that you realise that there has been a disconnect, because what people are seeing and experiencing and doing day to day on the ground is very, very different than what a perception is at a more senior level.
Yeah.
And it's then almost it's too late by that point. Actually, where are the bits that we've missed along the way, and actually how does this change what we need to do from an overall kind of delivery perspective?
So and that goes back to that proper two-way communication, but but it's about the authenticity and approachability of the senior leaders you have,
Absolutely.
and how much they're in touch with. Yeah, this might be a fantastic thing for shareholders. That Salesforce thing I talked about, where it was brilliant for the organisation to be able to predict its pipeline, see what margin it was giving away, where, in what sectors. Meant nothing to the people on the ground on the day-to-day basis. The actual account managers doing the job, they just want to know, well, how much am I going to earn next month? So it is, but you've got to create an environment where people can speak truth to power without fear or favour, as they say, but that comes down to the quality of your leaders, as I say, their approachability, their authenticity, and people who think, well, I can go and tell them. I can sit in front of them and say, I know I'm really junior, but and you're one of the senior bosses, but this program is really bad,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
and not think I won't be here tomorrow.
Exactly.
And that's the persona. Leaders create personas. I always talk about leaders cast big shadows. You've got to be a leader who creates that right shadow of that culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. So, kind of thinking about the the organisational context a bit more, I guess, around change. I think there are so many additional variables and things that are now coming into play, for a leader and for an organisation anyway. And it's something that, every exec team needs to think about when they're, contemplating and planning change. So we've got all of these big shifts sort of happening globally, political change, instability, lots of social movements. We don't need to kind of labour the point around the pace of change from a technology perspective, the sort of economic shifts and turmoil that we've gone through and that we continue to go through. Even in the workplace, there's so many demographic changes, multiple generations now in the workplace, and just how those, interact and kind of come together. So, and I think as well, probably we know more about what it is to be human now than we've probably ever done in our lifetime, with the advancements in neuroscience and psychology. So there's all of these other external things that are coming into play, I guess, when you're planning or, delivering, a big transformation. And I guess, the question for me is from a leadership perspective, from an executive perspective, how do you kind of bring all of that into, all of those influences into that program, and how do you actually then sort of cut through some of that noise and make sense of it so you're paying attention to what's going on, but actually you're still focused on delivering that program? Because there's a lot to take into account, I guess.
It is a big question. So I think it depends on the leadership style, but I always would have a model of, we define a program, we define some objectives. I'd always, in that first 30, 60, 90 days, want to go back to, a wide spectrum of that leadership team with a hypothesis of, this is why I want to do this. And again, if you've created that right culture, people will go, well, you've missed a bit there, or actually, I think you've left those people behind, or that won't actually appeal or be motivating to those people over there. I'll talk openly, and you know this one as well. I went back into a digital marketing agency to help them transform themselves and get ready for a potential sale. But it was a real culture change for me, at the age of whatever I was, late 40s, early 50s. And my first time I had a management team that I was at least 20 years older. But I think, they were all STEM graduates, average age of I think about 32 was the average age of my leadership team. And that was quite a culture shock for me for the first time. The oldest guy in the room by quite some way. And I had to change my communication style, and I had to talk them through, and that was quite a, well, yeah, but you ought to pitch it a bit more like this. And I was very conscious of the generational divide and and different ways to appeal that. But I sanity checked with them, and they were like, right, they marked my homework and was like, Mark, you should do it a bit more like this, do it more like that. No, that looks a bit, God, that looks old, Grandpa. Don't do that. But you create that environment. So it is about sanity checking. Creating that thing of you can have a working hypothesis or an assumption as a leader, but openly talking about it with people, working through it and listening to that feedback and adapting to it. But I think that's what good leaders do. They create that you're always learning, and you're there with your hand on the tiller. But other people should be shouting the instructions of where to go, and you've got to listen to those instructions and take them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something in that as well about kind of being ego-less as a leader as well, because I think, and I've worked with a few of them where, actually leaders think that they do know the answer and they do know the way to do it, and actually, what do you know? And actually that does, well, one, it just creates a real issue in terms of trust, but actually it doesn't create that culture in terms of being able to raise issues or flag when you think something's kind of going wrong as well. So, but that does take some work from a kind of a leadership and self-awareness perspective, I guess, isn't it?
It does. What you're actually, I think what you're referring to is that psychological safety thing. Is you've got to create an environment that it's okay to be the heretic. And I've had those in programs, and you've got to value that the person who says, I don't think this is going to work. Because sometimes they're right. It won't be the first time in life that actually there's 20 people in the room and they all think it's going to be fine, and that one person says, "Oh, actually, I'm not sure it will work," and they're right. So, but that's that. And there's there's all the technical stuff about how you run a program and milestones and all that sort of stuff. But it's fundamentally about as we talked about, in my opinion, the quality of the leader. And in the modern environment, I think the right leaders are the people who create that psychological safety of it's okay for me to be the heretic, or it's okay for me to say I don't believe, or and you don't. And the important thing is you react to that in a consistent style. You can't have people, and I've seen it, who are like, when people are like, oh, it's the classic, well, it's gone wrong, and I don't think the next program bit's going to work. They're like, well, who fly off the handle, and they're like, well, who do I shoot? Surprise, surprise, what happens the second time the program goes wrong? You ain't going to hear about it, and then you're going to be in an even worse state. So that, but that is about modern leadership characteristics, and I do think when you lead modern programs, this thing of it shouldn't be, oh, well, as transformation director, a job isn't a very important one. It should be, well, who's our best leader? And actually, that Vodafone was, when I was there, was good about that. Right, we'll take our best leaders to lead the biggest change programs, and it's a really important skill, as opposed to, well, there's a team over there, they do it, and they're not seen as the high flyers.
Yeah. I think so when I think about the change programs I've been involved with, there's always been like, there's been multiple levels, but I guess the three levels that always sort of struck out for me is that there is you've got change happening at an organizational level, so change around the whole system, the operating model, the way that you're working, the organizational design of it, and how the organization needs to be set up in order for the change to be successful. And then you've got kind of, the second level, which is around, the leadership of the actual change. So the leaders themselves, but also the kind of the program and the delivery of it. And then for me, the third bit is the bit, I guess, that we're touching on a bit today, is around that human part of the change. So the individual level of change. And I think what often happens is there's a lot of thinking and planning at level 1 and 2, so an organisation and a kind of a program level, but on a number of times not been enough sort of thinking and planning around, let's actually map what it takes for a person to kind of navigate change and to come out the other side in a really good place and kind of really engaged. There's just not been enough attention paid on that bit. So just interested in kind of your view on that, in terms of what were, where change has gone well, what else were those organisations or leaders doing around that kind of individual employee level as well?
Yeah, I have a phrase, not mine, but I've stolen from others, which is, no plan survives normally the first engagement with the customer or the employee, because it says you can have these nice high-flowing ideas as as the senior leaders on a strategic plan, but actually then it goes out to and people behave differently, and therefore different variables come back. The thing for me is, you can never over communicate enough, and clear communication. Now, fun enough, I learned later in life, my style as a leader was, I'm always like, I bank the positives, and then how do I mitigate my negatives? And I don't talk about the positives enough. Now, I'd always make sure, therefore, in the programs, I'd find that person who was that brilliant orator, who was, and one of the programs I'll name check, and there was a guy called Al Russell worked for me. Al was just one of those brilliant orators who could do analogies that would just be so good and so representative of where the program was at, and so funny as well, but boiled it down into really simple language that everybody could relate to, and stuff like that. So for me, those things are often about when you put in a plan, you'll never know what exactly is going to be the response. So it is you've created that communication channel, um, and you can't ask enough, if you see what I mean. Fine, if they get bored with you telling them what they're on, you're on the third time you've told them, it's their classic tell them again, tell them you told them.
Yeah.
That never did any harm in my experience. You couldn't over communicate, because there'll be some people like, oh look, I'm through this change curve. It's a really good idea. Yeah, I bought into it.
Yeah.
There'll be some people who are slower on the change curve and they're still getting there on the third attempt. But you also need to find those people who can communicate that in the right way, that have credibility, trust, whatever the important attribute is. So for me, that stuff is all about, you set your course, but feel what the wind is and what the change of the tides are, and adapt. And the only way you can do that is by listening and watching. And that doesn't happen enough generally in what I've seen. Or if it goes wrong, as we talked about a bit, that's normally the cause of it. Yeah, there are other milestone stuff, but as you say, it's about people who either all go through that different change curve, and sometimes by the end of the project you might not even have everybody through the change curve. There'll be still some people who are resisting it, but if you've got the majority on board by then by and large that thing will get through and will succeed and will work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. I mean, I think, again, where change has worked really well, where, the projects I've been involved with, I think that there has been that time and attention on actually navigating teams and individuals through it. And some of that is, I'm a big fan of some of the work by William Bridges and Bruce Feiler, and their work is very much around kind of the transition process. So there's an element where it's almost like, employees need to kind of let go of the way it was, because that's changing.
Yeah.
But there needs to be time and space kind of, created for people to let go of that. So I remember in one program I was involved with, where we were changing a lot of the kind of the geographical footprint of an organisation. So some locations were closing, others were opening. So we had almost like what we call, goodbye parties for that location, just as a way of sort of, letting go of that ending and all of the memories and the history that was associated with that before the kind of the new beginning sort of started. And I think that's a lot of the work that that William Bridges sort of started around this transition process of endings, that kind of bit in the middle where there's that uncertainty before you get to the new beginnings. And of course, as humans, we could be across all of those three stages at any one time. So,
and I think that raises a really important point for me as well there, which is, the other thing I learned about this program is have those difficult conversations honestly and early. And people have always amazed me, the amount of people who've, you're doing major transformation programs and they know their team is coming to an end when this thing is implemented. You still work professionally all the way through. But because you've been fairly transparent with them early on, and you've talked about, these are the options, redeployment. Most people can deal with change as long as you give them enough warning. It's when you drop it on them as a surprise and all of a sudden you hide it, and that's when the problems start. If it's like, well, actually that team's not going to be here on this day, if you give them plenty of warning and you tell them, well, I don't know for definite, but this is the direction of travel, people in my experience respond well to that. It's when you don't tell them and then go, right, sorry, you're all not here tomorrow. It's a surprise that understandably, and then surprise, you can't get people to speak open, honestly, and work on other programs effectively when you do that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, change can be really difficult, right? I think we, as humans, we are, more often than not wired to kind of stick with what we know. It's what keeps us kind of safe. And that's part of our sort of primitive part of our brain, at a very subconscious level. And I think, often where you've got change that really challenges your sense of self or the way you kind of live your life, it can come across in your brain, gets processed as almost as a threat. So I guess I think it's kind of building that time in from a leadership perspective to understand that people need to do that processing, and that what might in the first instance be a concern or a threat actually can be worked through if we just understand that kind of the human processing, I guess, behind it. So I guess for me, I'm just interested as to what else you've sort of observed on your kind of leadership journey and your transformation journeys, in terms of what else has helped other people to kind of adapt to, like, to a big change, and how they've got through the other side.
I think it's that thing of normally when you've started a program, what's the greater benefit, and as long as that, something that's not motivating, which we want to make the company more money, but if it's actually we want to deliver a better customer experience, or we want to make sure that this company survives for other people because our competitors are doing this, or there's this competitive landscape or something like that.
Yeah.
I think what I would call the greater good reason we're doing this is important. You've got to have some clarity around why this you might want to do. It might not be good for you, but actually it's good for all these other people, or it's going to protect the organisation's long-term future. People will be okay with that in my experience. So I think there's some things around. You've got to have thought through that as a senior leadership team right from the start as to why are we doing this and why is it important, and why also therefore when it becomes difficult and some people are badly impacted, are we still going to continue with it? And so that stuff's I think really important. I mean, when I've seen people sometimes really struggling with it, I think I normally point them in two places. The first one is sit back, get a sense of perspective. So it wouldn't be the first time in really pressure programs where I'm like, you look at people as you go, you just need a couple of weeks holiday. You genuinely do. I've learned that sometimes in bad situations, just working harder and longer isn't actually going to fix it, fun enough. And stepping out, getting a sense of perspective, taking a break, go and spend time with your friends and family and realise, okay, maybe it's not the be all and end all, or the end of the world, and those sorts of things are important as well. So I think sometimes creating a place where they can get a sense of perspective, you get them out of the boiling pan, as it were. I think is another tool I would say I've deployed. I've often sometimes said to people, go and speak to some other people as well. Go and benchmark this. Who are those trusted people outside this organisation that you go to and speak to? I mean, I had a conversation on the way here today with someone who I'm not going to name check, who would basically, CEO who'd had 3 programs go bad in a short space of time, and like we all do, there's a large percent of the world suffer from imposter syndrome, and he was ringing me for as a sort of sounding board, and he was like, "Is it me?" And actually, so he was using what I've often used, which is a trusted advisor who knows me, gives me a sense of perspective, and I was like, "No, you've just been unlucky. Actually, let's go through them." No, but he also knows somebody who's telling the truth. Whereas if it was like, well, yeah, you did, those 3 programs, you didn't do the important things, did you? But no, it was just unlucky, and that happens. As your stats say, there is a large percentage of failure. It's like embrace failure. What have you learned from them, etc. So that, for them, 3 things. There is what's the bigger, broader goal. Talk people through that, and get them to really understand that as to why it's important in the wider picture, and possibly not just about them. The second one for me is sometimes it's about people just get out of give yourself some breathing space, reflect, time to take a break from it, and that third one is maybe talk to some people who you trust to give you an independent perspective, and they might be those people who tell you, look, you're being unreasonable.
Absolutely.
You've got to learn to suck this up. You're asking for the moon on a stick, and that's not realistic. And so, but they'll normally be, I would recommend, outside the organisation, because it's someone's quite hard when
because
they're
it's a different perspective, right?
Yes.
There's a little bit, one step removed, a little bit kind of dispassionate from kind of the emotions, I guess, of what's going on in that change, because it can feel a very personal thing, right? You can be in the middle of it. You've done a role in a particular way, or you're in charge of a team or a department, and that's all changing. It can feel personal at times. So actually getting that level of perspective, I guess, from someone else is really valuable. Actually, that kind of sense check. What else? I mean, I guess, we're now in this kind of, crazy world where things are constantly shifting on their head every day. It is tiring at times, with so many different things shifting. So from a kind of leadership perspective, what have you seen kind of, people do in terms of being able to build up their resilience around this and being able to build up their change agility? Some of it will come from, just life experiences, and it's often a conversation that, we have at home about our kids, and that they've had a very sort of steady life, actually. They probably haven't kind of met too many curveballs yet. But so actually, how resilient are they when, perhaps when things don't go their way or things are more challenging? So I guess from an organisation and leadership perspective, how have you seen some of those organisations build up that resilience, I guess, to the fact that, change is going to continue to happen at greater pace?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think organisations understanding that transformation or change management is now, as you say, more constant and is a really important skill. So leading programs or change programs is a core competency. So, and understanding what the skills are for that. I was really lucky. I did that over 20 years ago now, that first transformation, which I genuinely at the time thought Vodafone was mad to ask me to do. Now that one went well, and off the back of that, I learnt what I call my operating model. And I definitely had ones that went bad, and but I had faith in I've read enough transformation programs and I've got my model and this by and large works, and therefore that there's a bit of you hang on to your process and your structure when it gets hard, which is so when it gets hard, there's a bit more of I've done this before and I know this is difficult now, but I know that if I do these things, it might take me longer than it did last time, but if I do this thing and I follow this process, it should come good in the end. So you know, so know what your operating model is for how you lead and transform change, I think is an important thing. And then I think organisations need to encourage that as a skill set and value it. As I say, this thing of, it's actually US to UK. It's an interesting cultural thing of embracing people who talk openly about those 30% of failures of programs that they've led and what they learn. How many times do the classic interview stuff of people talk about all the wonderful things they've done, and if you ask them, well, what have you failed at? But it's always some token gesture rather than an open and transparent. I led this program and it went really badly south. And I've now had sense of perspective, and actually what I learned was this, that, and the other didn't work. So I think there's a I think you yourself know what your operating model is for leading change, how you do it, what's your method, what's your process, which is a skill that organisations can help you with. I think organisations need to value that in their leaders and think about, as I said, how do they say, well, actually, if you're going to be a senior leader of a function, actually, you've got to lead a couple of transformation programs before you get there, and those sorts of things. So, those are the sorts of things I think organisations need to be developing it and recognising it as a capability, and the classic of, and you don't shoot people when they fail at one, because the stats are very clear. At some point, people are going to have failures, and you don't brand that person as not competent because they had one went wrong.
And it's got to go wrong in order,
sometimes,
because
exactly.
that's how you learn
you
your
will be a
best
better
lessons.
leader. I always viewed I learned far more from my failures than I did my successes.
So you touched on your kind of your operating model and your kind of your toolkit. So what sort of things are your go-to sort of approaches or solutions around leading change? What are some of the things that you will always do?
So I've probably talked a bit about some of them. So I'll go in, I'll have a 30, 60, 90-day plan. I definitely want to have a hypothesis of what normally I was historically put into situations of things have gone bad, can you fix it? But I would be trying to create an environment that 30, 60, 90 days of, look, we're here. This isn't where we need to be. We need to get to here. This is my assessment of the key things to do to get from here to here. But you'd create an environment in your team that, and normally I tend to be with the leadership team first, of let's go and discuss that for a couple of days off site, whether that be at 30, 60, 90 days. But create that environment where they could tell the truth to you and go, Mark, you're on a different planet. That is never going to work. And get consensus out of that room. But then there's, okay, we as a leadership team agree we need to go from here to here. This is our working hypothesis of what needs to be done. These are the key bits to do. There'd be, what are we going to stop then? How are we going to create time and space so it isn't overload for people? And then you go and sanity check that with the rank and file. And I talked about doing those, the groups of 30 with the account managers and in the sales transformation. But so you then get a rounded view and stuff like that. And then how do I communicate? And I know, as I mentioned it earlier, I can be a bit downbeat sometimes in my comms because I am like, right, I bank the positives. Like, let me now talk about the things that I mitigate most of what I'm going to fix. So I need to find those people who are the evangelists and also have already in the organisation who have credibility and stature, that if I can convince them to stand up and say to the organisation,
it's all right.
This is all right. We should do this. It's a good thing. I've seen the plan. We think it's the right thing to do. It's find those people as well and stick them out front. It's not all about me and my ego and standing up and doing the big presentation. It's who are those people I think are going to lead the people through the change, possibly more, more credibility in that first phase than me, and those sorts of things.
I guess we talked a little bit about where it hasn't gone quite so
Yeah.
well. So I'm keen to kind of learn what's what have been your biggest lessons, I guess, where it hasn't, where things haven't gone very well.
So,
What have you learned from it?
So my own biggest personal lessons are, what I learned was on some of the bigger ones was that went wrong was, I need to ask for help more. I used to pride myself on, which was a strength and a weakness, on being very even-handed when good and bad news came, creating an environment where people would speak, the truth to you. But at times, therefore, when it was going bad, I'd try to pretend almost that, I was calm, it was fine, etc. So that led to a byproduct of probably not opening up enough with other senior leaders about, I'm really worried about this, it's all gone bad, because I was trying to give the, impression of, look, it's all right, the world isn't ending, you can come and talk to me about stuff. So definitely one of my weaknesses was that not being transparent enough with other senior leaders around me when I was doing big programs about, I think it's going south, I'm concerned, and probably not asking for enough help. The classic of, well, I've done these before, I'll get through it, and there are times I'll stick to my structure and my process, and that will get it right. But there are times when you've got to realise, actually, I need help and I can't do it. And as I got older and wiser, I got better at, and I talked about it a bit earlier, going to those external references and saying, look, I'm struggling with this. Can I talk it through with you? What do you think I should do? People I trust, their opinion I respect, who knew me well, who would then go, actually, you probably should go and ask for a bit more help, shouldn't you, Mark? But that was learned at the expense of some painful battle scars of ones that didn't go right, where I tried to do the classic, well, I'll work harder, I'll take more on, I'll do it myself, and fun worked out that didn't actually work out in the end very well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're in good company. We've all got them, right? We've all got those defining moments in our career where you think, oh gosh, that didn't go too well. But you learn the biggest lessons, and I think you learn a lot about yourself as a leader, but also about human nature as well, right? About how other people react to certain things as well, which is just at the time it's uncomfortable, but it's an important part of kind of learning your toolkit, I guess, as a leader, and especially a leader navigating really difficult transformation and change. So you now do, you've done lots of different roles across your sort of career, from sales and marketing into operations, and now doing the work with Vistage and the chair role that you have. So I guess how's your mindset evolved, I guess, over that, in terms of you as a change leader? What's been important for you in terms of your own sense of self as a leader through change?
You desperately hope that you can help others from the experience of your battle scars. So, I think I'm better at listening and trying to help people. I think I'm I think I'm a hope I've become better at accepting there are many different styles and ways to do this, and my style worked for me, but my style isn't the only style. I think that's the other thing I've learned, and I try to encourage and support people with, it might not be my style, but it's your style, and let's talk through how your style works and how you develop and encourage that. So,
I guess as well. I mean that's a great answer, actually, in terms of that flexibility of style, I guess, and we're all unique, and therefore we've got to find something that works for us. I guess the other thing I'm keen to tap into around that mindset stuff is, it can sometimes be a really lonely place when you're, leading an organisation, having to make some of those decisions. Of course, you've got your kind of, your board, your senior leadership team, but there is that enormous sense of responsibility of, of carrying that organisation through that transformation. And I guess for me, it's kind of tapping into what else do you need to have in your mindset. We talked a little bit about imposter syndrome earlier, but what else is kind of in there that kind of gets you through those harder moments, I guess?
I think, So yes, I definitely a few things I've learned. The first one, actually, I did it for other people, but then I learned how to do it for myself as well, which is, when it feels tough, just get a sense of perspective. Fun enough, there was one particular program I was doing. It wasn't going well. I couldn't see the wood for the trees, and actually I decided, right, I was going to go and take a 2 week holiday and do nothing on it, But it would, and bizarrely, while I was away for 2 weeks, the classic, subconscious brain started processing, and I suddenly realised we'd been doing something completely wrong
Yeah.
about our approach. And came back and changed it, and we got it back on track. But I don't think if I'd actually, if I'd done the classic work harder, stay, do more, review meetings, etc., I wouldn't have got there.
Yeah.
So I've got better at create time and space for yourself, decompress. I think I've got much better at that, using a trusted network and being open and transparent with those people. And that isn't actually sometimes your friends, that is what I would call trusted confidence. People, and in the time I was a Vodafone, they were really good at this. They created a very tight leadership team, and there was something called the SL2, sort of top 100 leaders. But you could ring any one of those, because they'd be in different parts of the world, different countries, and you'd have worked with them on boards of companies at different times. But they understood your sector. They weren't working on your project, but it's a very tight knit community where you could go, look, I'm struggling, I find this tough, and you'd get really good feedback or advice. So finding that trusted network, and it isn't your mates actually. Frequently, it's just people who you think, are honest, ethical, and got experience that's relevant.
Yeah.
That are like, I just want to talk, and I want you to hold up the mirror, and I want you to ask, almost like a classic coaching conversation.
Yeah.
I want, me quite well. We've been on a bunch of, leadership development courses together. We've done exercise. It'll be that we've done exercises together. We know each other's sort of, psychological makeup or whatever, and you understand my business and the challenges and something about my situation. Now can I talk to you about my problem for a while, and you just poke and prod me.
Yeah.
I got a lot better at that as well, which would give you that 360-degree view, a better sense of perspective. So I think those were the important things I got better at: decompressing,
Yeah.
not trying to work harder on stuff, and finding the right people to be open and transparent with around, this is proving hard, can I just talk it through, and those things, and actually creating time and space for me as well was another thing. I think it's very important that people have their things they do outside of work that decompress them. So all of those things I got better at as I got older.
Yeah. And I think there is also something about, and we've talked about this previously, I think realising that, you don't have to be all things to all people, right?
Yes.
And I think that does come with, as you go through your career. But I think, it's okay that, these are the things I'm really good at. And actually, I'm going to lead from that place.
Yeah.
But I need to make sure that actually those other things are covered in a different way.
Yeah.
And it's being confident around that as well. I
Yeah.
think it's having that sort of self-belief and confidence about where you fit into that transformation programme and what, what
Totally.
you're going to bring to the table.
Yeah, and I talked about it a bit earlier. When I talked about, I would do always with my teams the different tools that, or what was their profile. One of the things I would always do very early on with any new team would be, this is me, and I'd always have a slide. These are my known strengths and my known weaknesses, and I used to put currently at the bottom, open to feedback, just for fun. But the point I was making was, we're all pluses and minuses in my view of the world.
Yeah.
And making it clear that I'm not, I'm not omnipotent, or I'm good at certain things and bad at others, and we'll be transparent about that, and we'll work through that as a team. So yes, I agree. I think that was always a really important trait, and something I got much more comfortable with as I got older, and I'd had a few successes of it's okay to you don't have to try to convince everybody you're perfect.
The work you do now, Mark, as a Vistage chair, and you're also chair at BoostWorks. So tell me a little bit more about some of the challenges, I guess, of change in those size businesses. They tend to be more in the small to medium size enterprises. So tell me more about kind of some of the challenges of change in that environment.
So it's much smaller teams. Large organisations will have a transformation team, program management resource, all that sort of stuff. People who do nice Gantt charts and all those sorts of things. Normally, it's just the CEO driving that change. They don't have that level of overhead. They don't often have that level of experience about running programs. So, frequently what I find amongst those people. Now, the positive is it's actually quite easy sometimes, or quicker to move, and they're not such large oil tankers. They're little speedboats in comparison, and therefore, so they can get them all in the room and go, right, we're going left. So there there's pluses and minuses. Same fundamental things though are they leaders who can inspire, motivate, be seen to be authentic? People can speak truth to power. Can they take people with them? That's the common trait. And I spend a fair amount of time, as I say, in that sector now, working with those people. frequently I'll be saying to them, you probably do need to bring in a part-time, day or two a week, someone to do the program management bit, but this is more about how you and your team lead, and it's the core in the DNA of their leadership style. They don't possibly need quite as much infrastructure as a large organisation because the customer processes aren't quite so complicated, all those sorts of things, and because they can get them all in a room once a week in most cases, or well, no, sometimes they're too big to do that. But you're not talking about 8,000 people. You're talking about a couple of hundred people that therefore, and they'll all read the email that comes from the chief exec, or if he says I'm doing a webinar, they'll get high levels of attendance, and they can walk round their sites quite easily because there might only be 3 or 4 of them, and talk to the people on the front line about what it is. But same guiding principles apply. 99 times out of 100, it comes down to the quality of the senior leaders driving that change, and do they do it in the right way, and do they bring people with them? Do they communicate effectively? Do they create an inspiring vision? All the standard stuff.
Brilliant. So to close today, what would you say have been your 3 secrets of successfully leading change?
Well, we'll dispute how successful, but on a different occasion, I think, the first one is that, look, be an authentic leader, create an environment that people can speak truth to power. Those 2 things are they're slightly different, but they're quite closely wrapped up for me. I think that you can't over communicate, and don't just spend the time in your senior leadership team. It's about getting across the organisation, up and down it, as I say, across as well, and really hearing. I used to have a trick that I would deliberately go and see, as I said, the account manager with no other senior leaders in the room, because I didn't want it filtered by the management or them thinking, well, I know I mustn't say that in front of my line manager. So those sorts of things. So I think that make sure you really got unfiltered communication coming back to you. And I suppose that the third one would be that have your own operating model. Know what, to your point earlier, what you're good at, what you're not good at, what your method and process and structure is, and the bits you do well and the bits you need help on. So knowing what that process is, which bits you do well, which bits you need help with, that are how you go through the process, I think would be the other thing I'd say.
Great. Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you
today.
Well.
Thank you.
I always enjoy our conversations, so thank you so much for being part of this, and look forward to chatting again at some point in the future.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. To hear more about our business insights and interviews with senior leaders, you can subscribe to the Eton Bridge podcast on Apple or Spotify, and you can watch the full interview on YouTube. You can also keep in touch with us via our LinkedIn page, and if you'd like to hear more about the great work we do across our search, interim or consulting practices, do get in touch. We'd love to chat.